Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Last in Line Leadership Project that we call Control Your Aim. And I hope you've enjoyed the last couple episodes. We've talked a lot about attitude, intent, and motivation. Today, we are privileged to have a gentleman out of Coppell, Texas, up by the Dallas area. And his name is Stewart Hardy. And Stewart is going to talk to you a little bit more about his background than I am, but he is co-founder and now, I guess, the president of their All-In Sports Outreach. They do a podcast, and I'm going to let him tell because he's going to do it way more justice than I do, but I think you're going to be excited about this ministry and about this impact this is having. Stewart, welcome.
Thanks, man. Hey, John, I really appreciate the opportunity. I love the platform you're creating with the Last in Line Leadership, so I'm just honored to be on.
Awesome. Well, so tell us a little bit about All-In Sports Outreach. I know of what you've told me in the past is, you really have your finger on the pulse of high school and college athletics in the state of Texas. And I think you've done an awesome job about reaching out to those leaders, those coaches, even maybe some athletes here and there, getting kind of their perspective on faith and some of their journey. So talk a little bit more about that.
If I had to boil down kind of who we are, what we do, it's, we just try to encourage coaches, athletes in their walk with Christ. And one of the ways we do that, the main way we do is through media. You mentioned a podcast. So I host a podcast where we interview coaches at the high school, some college level, and just talk about their faith journey, talk about sports, because everybody loves sports. To me, what I think is there are like two things that will bring people together. It's food and sports, and I like both of those, but it's hard, we
especially in the state of
sports
Texas.
Route. Exactly.
Especially in the state of Texas.
And so the idea was there's so many platforms for the national, more recognized coaches and athletes to share their faith, but there wasn't anything that I saw for the local. And so a friend of mine just kind of encouraged me to start it. And the idea was we're going to do one a month and just interview some people we know, but God's been gracious over the last couple of years. And, we've got listeners all over the world. We interview people from literally all over the country. And the cool thing is we've been fortunate to interview some bigger name folks, if you will, people that everybody's heard of. But when you break it down and look at the audience, when I interview someone that nobody's ever heard of, their story is just as powerful as somebody that everybody's heard of. And actually, if you want to break down statistics, the one that nobody's ever heard of typically will, I hate to say outperform, more people will listen to that one.
Yeah. And it's all about relatability too. It make your audience relates to those common, ordinary, kind of like, me, you, what we're doing.
Right. I just think it's a great reminder. The takeaway I always leave with every time I record one is that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
You don't have to have gone through anything dramatic. You don't have to be the coach at Clemson. You don't have to be whatever, the CEO of this company. Yeah. Everybody has a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you're familiar a little bit with what we're doing on this series called Control Your Aim. And my goal was to reach out to you and learn a little bit more about kind of your faith walk. And you can kind of fold that into the discussion about how, you come into Christ and your journey along the way with that and your ministry. But we want to talk first kind of about attitude. And we've talked a lot in the past couple episodes about it really is a driving force and kind of is the foundation of your daily activity and your mindset and your approach and perspective. I know you've got a military background, you serve in the military, and thank you. I speak for everybody that appreciates the freedoms that we enjoy. I speak for everybody saying thank you for that. And, that's a very, I would say that journey was probably some roller coaster of emotions and attitude adjustments along the way. Tell me maybe how you experienced some of that ups and downs in attitude.
Yeah. I'll talk just briefly about, you mentioned faith journey. So I was fortunate to grow up in a great family. We went to church, but it wasn't until I was 15 that I think it was 1988. Yeah, 15, where I really realized that it wasn't about my church membership or my parents' faith. It wasn't about just going to church.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, I needed that relationship with Jesus. So it started there, but just like, you mentioned everybody's got highs and lows. I mean, I think the Christian walk is the perfect example. We're not always on that mountaintop experience. No, you do have those ups and downs, but it goes back to, I grew up in a small town, went to a small church. And at times in the last 2 years of high school, I'd get frustrated with the youth group because it was very small. And I'd feel like I'm the only one going or whatever. And something my dad said to me then that sticks with me now. And I try to use it in the right opportunities with my own kids, was he would just tell me, son, you get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah.
If you sit at home and complain about it, you're doing no good for them or for you. And I just think the same is true in life. And that's kind of the way I approach when I did join the Air Force right out of high school.
Yeah.
I turned 19 in basic training. So I was young, undisciplined in a lot of ways. And so, you learn a lot of discipline. And then my first assignment, I had this mindset that I would never live any farther west than Texas, any farther north than like Virginia. So I had drawn this map of my life of where it would be. And, when you join the military, I mean, you get to fill out a quote unquote dream sheet, and it is exactly that. It is a dream sheet, and so I had all the bases in Florida. Well, we're fast forward out of basic training. I'm in my advanced training technical school, and the day we learn our assignments, and everybody was getting like Minot, North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, Wyoming. And I'm just
not part of your carve out.
No. And they said, Airman Hardy. I said, yes, sir. He goes, you know where you're going? I said, no, sir. He goes, do you like potatoes?
Oh.
I didn't know what he meant. I'm like, French fries? Yeah. He goes, you want to Idaho? And I'll be honest, I had no clue where Idaho was. I had to pull out a map. And my dad had joked with me that week that I probably would end up somewhere like North Dakota or something like that, just because he just was having fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the downer for me when I pulled out a map.
Yeah.
Because I'm 19, my friends and family are in Alabama, and I was going to literally be across the country where I knew nobody. And so I get home on leave, and my dad helps me buy a car and decided that I was going to drive to Idaho. And I spent 3 days on the road, and I got there, and I was done. I'm like, I don't want to do this. But anyway, it ended up being the best experience of my life because it forced me to deal with some things of the past. Growing up in small town Alabama, and then you go to a place like Idaho, where at the time in the early 90s, I mean, it was, just very different than it is today. No diversity, and so being from Selma, Alabama, when I would say that, people would ask me questions that forced me to deal with my background of where I grew up. I was automatically thrown in this boat of being a Caucasian male from Selma, Alabama. I must have a certain mindset about race, so that was a hard time for me because people would come at me with accusations just because of where I was from. And so it caused me to grow up quick. But when I would hit those lows, I would just remember what my dad said, which is an attitude thing of you get out of it what you put into it. So that's, yeah. So that's awesome. Kind of my 2 cents on attitude.
I can almost imagine the mind games and the drive there. I can almost imagine your mental state of all of the awful scenarios and hypotheticals you're painting in your head, picture in your head. And I think it's a great picture of kind of what we do as Christians when when we have idle time or when we are just not filling our head full of the right thoughts and things and our input is garbage, we get garbage out, of course. So I can just imagine some of the horror stories you were painting in your head on that ride there. You have any, elaborate on any of the kind of where that took you to a dark place and then how you had to kind of rebound from that to get back on your feet mentally?
I'll say this, the drive was long, but there was a part of it that was not all bad because I had never been to that part of the country. And so my dad, it was before Google Maps and Waze and all that stuff. We had to get a paper map.
Paper map, yeah.
And we drew out the best route. And actually, I spent my first night on the road. I had some cousins that had just moved to Coppell, here where I am today, ironically, and spent the night with them. And then I drove through Colorado. We found a route because I had the time to go through the mountains instead of interstate. And had I not done that, I think it would have been horrible. But having to just taken a 2-lane road all the way across Colorado, up and down mountains, which I'd never seen before, really helped, I think, mentally deal with it, because I was just in awe of the beauty.
Wow. That's awesome.
Mountains.
Yeah.
And it was the summer. I get to the top of a mountain and I see snow, so I pull over. I remember pulling over and like touching the snow, because I'd probably seen snow 5 times in my whole life. And here I am, it's July, and I'm touching snow, and it's before you could take selfies. I probably would have done all that, but
Absolutely.
You didn't have a camera. And so I think seeing the beauty and just understanding that, God created all of that really helped deal with the drive. But I am convinced, had I not done that scenic route, it would not have been as great. But I'll tell you, the downer was when I get to Idaho, because in my mind, Idaho is going to be all mountains and beauty. The part of Idaho where I was stationed, that was desert, surrounded by mountains. And so from the town to the base was 10 miles, and it seemed like 3 hours of driving, because you're looking around this desert. And that's when I just lost everything. I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I here? This is not what I thought it would be. I want to go home. But as I approached the main gate, and plus you have nerves because you're getting ready to go,
of course, anxiety,
start life, right? Because you don't know if you're gonna have a roommate, what the dorm is like, none of that stuff. But I just kept reminding myself as I approached the main gate, son, you're gonna get out of it what you put into it. You're gonna get out of it what you put into it. And that just kept replaying in my mind. And I just think that's something that, I'm thankful that I had a dad who ingrained that in me.
Man, that story, it's awesome. And I hear, as you're telling it, I just think what a great metaphor about how we interpret and process our surroundings. Mm-hmm. Your mindset went to a different place based on what you saw around you.
That's right.
Right. And it happens all the time. Our circumstances, especially nowadays with COVID and some of this pandemic kind of collateral damage, if you will, we all are affected. Our attitude goes to a dark place because of what's around us. Or if we see something, positive, then our attitude kind of goes that direction. So it kind of goes back to, that's fine, but our attitude needs to be a decision ahead of time and not based on kind of external forces. And I've talked about that in the past episodes. And I'm a firm believer that we kind of get sucked into that vacuum of what's going on around us. And that dictates, so we're reactionary versus kind of being more proactive.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's a choice that I have to make every morning before my feet hit the floor. Because it is easy to grab whatever device you want to grab and look and, in your mind, I'm going to check on the news. Let me see what's going on in the world. But in reality, if you start your day that way, then you're already got division, right? Because everything we see, whether it's COVID, whether it's politics, even inside the church, everything there's this side and this side. And so that really can mess with your attitude. And I just think it goes back to, I try to start my day with this mindset that when I open my eyes, that, I'm thankful that God gave me breath in my lungs today. And if I can approach today with, I'm just thankful that I have breath in my lungs, then that hopefully gets me through whatever situations I'm going to face that day with a good attitude. And I know you've had Chip Baker on here. He and I have talked a lot about, just gratitude, right? And I just think it goes back to, it's what's the first thought, or, how do you approach it when you wake up before your feet hit the floor? What's going through your mind? And I can tell how my day is going to go based on that.
you're the third person in a row to mention how they start their day, and gratitude is the common theme. So I think there's something to take away from that for the audience, and I hope that's a nugget that they take away, and that's something for me too, because that really does direct the rest of your day mentally. Can you think of somebody, while we're on attitude, can you think of somebody that maybe has that you've kind of drawn from or respect, that you see their attitude is pretty unwavering and they're just breathing life into everything?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple friends that if I'm having a bad day, I can text them and I know their perspective on life is just always uplifting.
Yeah.
I would say the number one was, I mentioned my dad before.
Mm-hmm.
He was somebody that before he passed away, we didn't talk every day, we'd text every day. And he would always have that. He was that one person that if I was having a bad day, I'd text him, and he would always have sometimes it was humor, but some way to draw a good perspective and make me realize that what I'm going through is really not that bad.
Yeah.
It seems bad, but it's not. In the grand scheme of things, there's positive in everything.
Yeah.
So I would say my dad would be number one. But yeah, I have a couple of friends I keep close in my life that I know that if I'm having a bad day or I got a tough decision or I get some tough news, that if I text them, they're gonna speak some positive perspective to it, that I'm gonna go, wow, I didn't think about it that way. If I approach it this way, then it's much better.
Yeah.
So
That's great. No, I totally appreciate what you're saying about that, because it's key to have people around you that you can sort of lean on and draw from.
yeah,
So
because
our
I don't
next
want to
point,
pretend that I have it all, that, this whole
no,
attitude of gratitude. I don't want to pretend that I'm perfect at
yeah,
it, that I wake up every morning just happy and, thankful.
right,
And I'm just my feet hit the floor and I'm just grateful all the time. I don't want to, I
yeah,
don't want people to think that it's that simple, but it is something that when I do it, it changes my day. And I personally believe when I approach a day like that, it makes me, a better person. I'm a better husband to my wife. I'm a better dad to my kids,
yeah.
a better coworker. So I just think it
Mhm.
affects every aspect of life.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads in, and that's the great thing kind of about these sessions is that attitude, intent, and motivation, they almost feed off of each other and kind of blend and mold into each other. So the next point would be intent. And I always make sure that I differentiate that it's not about good intentions. That's not the context here. It's about intentionality, and it's about being intentional in how we operate throughout the day, whether it's relationships, whether it's finances, whether it's spirituality. Like, we have to develop muscle memory when it comes to that kind of thing. It doesn't just automatically come to us, right? Everything else does, seems like, information, food, whatever, entertainment, things can come to us and we probably never have to leave the house. Intentionality says that we have to take ownership, and that we take that proactive stance and we take that step for the day, for whatever. So maybe give us your perspective on being on purpose, if you will. So not coincidentally making it through your day reactionary to things around you, but kind of just being in control of that purpose.
Well, you mentioned something earlier about, what we feed ourselves with,
Mm-hmm.
garbage in, garbage out type thing, I think flows into for me, when I think of being intentional with my day or my purpose. So if I don't start my day pretty early in God's word, then
Yeah.
my day is done.
Yeah.
I can tell. And so I have to be intentional, though, because I'm easily distracted.
Yeah.
Because I wake up with 1,000 things on my mind, with work, with maybe it's a podcast I'm going to host, or just anything ministry related, or something in family. I'm easily distracted. So it's very easy for me to wake up, shower, brush my teeth, and then start work or start something else. And if I've missed that time, quiet time in the Bible, in prayer, then it impacts my ability to lead. my family. It impacts my ability to be a productive worker that day. I can just see a difference in my life. So I'm a part of a group, and it's mostly coaches that it's about. We started 1 year ago, October 1, where we just use the app GroupMe. It's like a group text, and so we pick a book of the Bible that we go through, and every, I'd say 20% of the people will share every day, kind of a takeaway, some encouragement for everybody. But a lot of people are in it, and, just for the accountability. But I know when I wake up, and I'm an early person, but by 4:30, there's already 1 or 2 people that have posted something in there. So that's that's the way I have to start my day. It's just being intentional with my walk with Christ. And if I'm intentional with that in the morning, then I feel like I'm going to approach my job, my family, my finances, ministry with much more of a intentional attitude and, intentional relationships. And that's another thing, I think of intentionality. I think for me, it's big in relationships. I have to be intentional with my relationship with my wife.
Absolutely.
We're married. We've been married 23 years. I got to be intentional with my relationship with my kids. So I just think there's a lot to that. But for me, it boils down to that personal relationship with Christ, and how am I being intentional with that, because that drives everything I do.
Yeah. And I want, excuse me, I want to make sure that pause here a little bit, because I want the audience to know we are just regular people. Like we have struggles, we have fears, we have insecurities. We are not preachers. We are not celebrities. There's nothing flashy, excuse me, I'll speak for me, that I do.
Right.
That makes me stand apart. And I'll say I've done it both ways. Starting the day without inviting the Lord in immediately, and I've done it with inviting the Lord in. And it's night and day on how my day goes. It's night and day how my attitude develops that day.
Oh yeah.
It's a total, it's Jekyll and Hyde, without a better example. But I'll just tell you, the audience, if you're out there thinking, I don't have time, my schedule's jam-packed, I hear you. I mean, I'm becoming a morning person, and it's something I had to be intentional about. Would I rather sleep an hour and a half more? I don't know. I'm kind of addicted to now getting up at 6 and spending time with the Lord. So now I'm really hungry for that. But in the past, when I first started, it wasn't easy. I really enjoyed that sleep. But man, when you start letting it become part of you and you're dependent on that, that's what I will encourage the folks today.
Absolutely. And, and the beautiful thing now is you can go on the Bible app and you can find, if you're not comfortable with just picking a book of the Bible to read, you can just go find a reading plan.
Devotionals all day long. Yep.
And it's so simple. You can just get your phone or iPad and it's right there, right? I'm still an old fashioned. I do use the Bible app, but I also like the paper as well. But you're right. It is a decision that you have to make, and it's not an easy one at first, but you're right. Once you start, it is very obvious how it impacts your day. And I would say too, to add to, your encouragement to people listening and watching, is to tell somebody you're going to do it, because then, and give them the freedom to text you or call you and say, hey, what'd you read this morning? What time did you get up? How'd you start your day? If you create that accountability, it'll push you. And I personally believe it'll change your life.
You'll be surprised, I think, pleasantly, when you start incorporating other people in that journey. I think you'll be surprised at some of the fruit that comes out of that.
Absolutely.
Man, that's gold. And I appreciate that, because you mentioned something about how you lead your family is affected by that first 30 minutes, whatever, that's time you spend. Because, I say all the time, we're all leaders. Whether people admit it or not, it doesn't change the truth or the fact that we are all
everybody's a leader,
wired to lead somebody. And so even if it's in the four walls of your home, you're leading your marriage, your wife, you're leading your kids. So that's huge. So can you give me maybe a nugget, maybe an example of where starting your day that way, and this is a little off script, so you're kind of on the spot, but just give me kind of a general, it doesn't have to be real specific, but a time where you noticed that had you not started your day that way, it could have maybe derailed your day, maybe in a leadership context. Anything you can think of, just in general, at work, at home, ministry.
I think I can think of a number of examples, both at work and at home.
Yeah.
In when a difficult situation comes up, I can tell how I respond to it is indicative of whether I spent my time in the Word that morning or not. If I did not, my response is probably going to be a little less thought out, a little less kind, a little more harsh because my mind is not where it should be. I think there's probably a number of examples where it's how I respond to something is indicative of that. Yeah,
that's awesome. So we're going to get into a little bit. The last thing here is motivation. Man, you talk a lot to the athletic world. You speak to your podcast, you're focused on coaches, and man, what more motivated individual than somebody in the athletic world? Talk to me a little bit about what gets you out of bed in regards to your ministry, in regards to leadership, kind of what drives you. And I'll kind of make a caveat of, obviously we have a family we're supporting and providing for. So let's take that out of the equation while that's very, very important. But for the sake of this conversation, what is it that gets you out of bed?
I mean, my initial thought is, you said that's kind of out of the equation, is, is family, and I do provide for them. But when it comes to ministry, I love the relationships, and I just know that, because I've heard enough testimony of it, is that it goes back to, I think I said earlier, everybody has a story. And so when you get to hear someone's story, I can't tell you how many times that I've talked to a coach or someone in athletics to record a podcast, and I'll hit the stop button and think, I don't even have to publish this one because God's already used it in my own life.
Wow.
And that's to me, a motivating factor, because I think, okay, if God used it in my life, then there's somebody else who needs to hear it. So when it comes to ministry, that's the big part of it. But I think it's bigger for me. It is bigger than that. I just feel like every day, what gets me out of bed is the thought of, God gave me breath. If I didn't have any purpose left here, I wouldn't have breath in my lungs. So if I wake up being thankful that I'm awake, then I know there's something that God wants me to do that day. And so I try to then transition to everything that I put in my mind, my ears, everything that comes out of my mouth. If I can filter that, and with the help of the Holy Spirit clearly, to where that reflects Christ in how I do, then that motivates me, because God woke me up for a purpose that day.
Yeah. And so I would say, your encouragement to the listeners here, because let's face it, a lot of times we're motivated, by what we think someone else is going to either approve or disapprove of that we do. So other people kind of drive our motivation. A reward, an accomplishment, status, whatever we feel like we're going to receive out of it. Talk to me and the listeners really about kind of, it's bigger than us. Like you said that, I think, a minute ago, but it's not about us. So maybe give them some sort of challenge or encouragement. So tomorrow when they get up, maybe their motivation isn't as driven by what someone else approves of,
Mm-hmm.
or what accomplishment they can do that day from a tangible worldly standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's a hard one for a lot of people, because we all battle comparison, approval from others, just because we're exposed to it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all we see is everybody's good side. So what I think is, and I think Carson Wentz with the Eagles, I don't know if he created an organization called Audience of One, but there's this movement in athletics, this Audience of One, right?
Yes.
That I'm playing for God and God alone.
Right.
And that is incredible. And it's easy to say. I've got 3 teenagers. I tell them all the time, anybody can put on a social media platform, God, family, football, or whatever, right? But do my actions line up with that? So it's easy for me to go, oh, I'm here today, just an audience of one. I mean, it sounds spiritual, sounds great, sounds encouraging, but it's not, to me, it's not as easy. But if I go back to, we've talked a lot about it in this conversation though, of when, the psalm, the meditation of my heart will be pleasing to you. The words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you. If I can think about that all day, that what's in my heart, because what's in my heart is going to come out.
Yeah.
It's going to come out, what I type, what I say, what I think. And so if my heart is right and is pleasing to God, then I'm going to have a better attitude. I'm going to be more loving. I'm going to be more kind. I'm not going to get sucked into the division. I'm going to treat people better. And then it goes back to, the whole, another thing you see all the time, people say, just love God and love others. Well, that sounds easy, sounds good. And that's what God called us to do. But if my heart is right and pure, and what's coming out is right, is good and honoring God, it goes back to that. That's how that audience of one. And then if I'm loving God with everything, with my stuff, with my life, with my heart, then I'm able to love others.
Right.
I can't love others well without without a pure heart. So
it's hard enough to do it with a pure heart. It's hard enough to love the unlovable, especially.
Right. And I just think I get sucked into it still, about comparison to people that have their platform's bigger than mine, or, oh, they interviewed this guy, I'd love to interview him. And then I have to take a step back and go, they need to do them, I need to do me. Right.
Right.
So I just think anytime you get sucked into the approval of others, it takes you off focus to where you're so focused on winning approval of others. And I mean, all we have to do is turn on the TV every day to know that others will fail us every time.
Of course.
Of course. So I have to have that perspective that God created Stewart for a purpose. He created John for a purpose, and my purpose is different than your purpose. Yeah. I mean, the big purpose, we're all supposed, God wants us to love him and love others, but what he wants you to do today is different than what he wants me to do today. So I can't get sucked into, John just released a book. I need to write one too, because his platform is big.
What good looks like for me is going to look different for someone else.
Yeah. So if I approach it from the comparison thing, it's just dangerous.
It is.
And I think it leads to a very dark, mentally dark place.
Yeah.
To where you'll make some bad decisions after that.
You hit the nail on the head. I love the audience of one, and I was going to ask you about that because theoretically, conceptually, that's like the pinnacle, right? Like that's what we all should be driven by. But I'll say the trap I feel is when we let others define us.
Boom.
Because let's say, affirmation's a clean, that's a pure thing. Like that's scripture. We like encouragement. Encouragement's a gift. Obviously it's meant for other people. So we're obviously going to be on the receiving end of that. And that's important to us. And I get that. Like, if you ever read the book 5 Love Languages, like affirmation's one of them, and that's one of my big ones. Like that's what I respond to, and words of affirmation. So those are good, but we can't be trapped into something that defines us, that revolves around that. I tell my kids all the time who are athletes, collegiate athletes, you go be what you can be within the confines of your abilities and potential, right? You can't be somebody else if you're wired for this. And whatever happens doesn't define you, good or bad.
Right.
Like if you're all out just the man that particular day, that still doesn't define you. Don't let pride creep in. There's other things where that could go, but don't you think that the kind of the pivoting point there is how it defines you, what others say? If it does, then that's where it's sticky.
Yeah, because I think it's easy to get sucked into that when you have a great day.
Right,
athletics
right.
is easy to draw from, because you can go, okay, if I put up 70 points in this game, wow, I'm on this high. But then the next week I lose, I'm down here. Well, then, nobody wants to ride this up and down. That's why, if you have that right perspective, whether you score 70 points or give up 70, you're going to be able to sustain it, because you're not seeing your identity in an accomplishment or something bad that happened. Your identity is not in that.
That's it. And that's what I want the audience to hear right there. On this point, if you heard anything, your identity is not based on that, the affirmation of others, or your accomplishments. So
that's hard. I say it, and it kind of flows out of my mouth like I'm a expert in that, right? But that's something I think we all struggle with.
Of course,
is that, because it's easy for me to say, oh, my identity is not in what I do. My identity is as a child of God. Because that's the right answer. But in reality, that is my identity. Yeah. And I just have to embrace that. And I'm somebody that I need that reminder often.
Mm-hmm.
I need it.
We all do.
Often, because I can get sucked into that approval of others pretty quick. And then, the head starts getting inflated. And I tell people all the time, I see how people get sucked into pride.
Right.
Because it's easy.
Right.
You get 10, 12 people start telling you how great you are and doing such a great job, you start believing it.
Yep. I totally get it. You're right on with that. And you said something earlier, the word comparison. It's easy with our information technology age that we're in. How do you pick up your phone and not see someone else's life and then start comparing what you've done or have, or, it's easy to do.
And it's dangerous too. That's what I try to instill in my kids, especially, I mentioned 3 teenagers at home, 2 boys and a girl. That's the one thing I try to really drive home is when I hear little glimpses of comparison coming out, as we try to shut that down, because that'll lead to some very, very dangerous paths.
Yeah.
Not just for kids. Adults too. If I start comparing myself to others, it'll lead me to some bad decisions, and bad decisions lead to more bad decisions. And then, it just gets worse.
It does, man. I think we've hit on a lot of points, and I think we've hit on a lot of good takeaways for sure. But I do want to give you a chance to maybe talk about either something that you're kind of working on, or maybe kind of a dream God's given you that maybe you are going to see 3 to 6 months down the road come to fruition, and then talk some about what you're currently doing with All In Sports Outreach and where they can find you.
Okay. I'll start with the second part. So, the podcast continues. We're not releasing as many episodes as we were, just season of life. People are, just a lot going on, but it's always good to sit down like you and I are doing and talk to people. And like I said, they encourage me. So we're continuing with that. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all you do is search All In Sports Outreach and you'll find us there. We do discover, probably over COVID more than anything, that in our audience of mostly coaches, Twitter is where they hang out. So if you look us up, you'll see more activity there than Instagram and Facebook, but we use those. We have a website, allinsportsoutreach.org. You can find out a little bit more about who we are and kind of why we do what we do. We also, another thing we do that we started over COVID and it continues is we have a weekly coaches fellowship via Zoom where, it was much bigger in the spring and summer because, schools were closed. But we still, we meet on Sunday nights now. It's usually 10 or 12 of us, sometimes 25 guys or ladies will jump on from all over the country, literally. And it's just kind of neat to see how technology can bring people together. And somebody, we laugh, we fellowship, and then somebody shares some Bible study or devotional or shares a testimony. So that's been really the thing that really, really excites me the most. It's a highlight of my week. So it's better to do that. As far as dreams, there's several things kind of out there, kind of working through. One of them, I hope we can get completed in the next 3 to 6 months is we've engaged a number of coaches to write a devotional from the book of Proverbs. So it'll be 31 days in the book of Proverbs with this mindset of written by coaches for coaches, understanding that there's a lot of other great devotionals out there. The world does not need another devotional. We get that. But it's kind of bring it back to the podcast. It's the local coaches telling a story. And so we have engaged them and they've picked a proverb or two to write from, giving them, just no guidance other than kind of the format. And so some have taken a proverb and really broken it down to some personal experience. We have some that, took the theological approach. So it's going to be a very diverse book, and that we wanted it to be raw from the guys who wrote it. So we're hoping, we're starting some editing stages now. We got a couple more to have written. We got 3 phases of editing we're going to go through. So we're hoping in 6 months we can have that out, but we know that, a lot of coaches are knee deep in their seasons now. So, it may slow down a little bit. And, one of my struggles is sometimes my timeline gets ahead of God's. But we know that it'll be out in His time. So that's something we're super excited about. And it's really, I think that anybody can get something from it. It's not, we're going to market, I guess is the right word, to coaches because it's written by coaches for coaches, but it's going to be something that anybody can draw from because it's from God's word.
Yeah. That's another thing. One thing before we end, I want to touch on is in all the negativity that's out there and some of the ways that we see the youth of today being influenced in not so great ways, what your podcast does reveal and expose is the goodness that is out there, and the leaders in the state of Texas, I'm sure all over, but state of Texas has good coaches, educators leading our young people. And your podcast really shines a light on that. And that's what I've taken from, there's so many episodes, even if you're not releasing a lot of new stuff, there's so many that you could listen to over and over and pull one thing out of every time. And so the real people that are leading our kids, there's good out there. There's faith-based people that are leading godly examples.
And if you're a parent, you don't have to be someone in sports to go listen to it. I tell people all the time, the greatest encouragement I get is as a parent, knowing there's godly men and women in the schools, because I think even inside the church, and I'll keep this brief because this will get me on a soapbox.
Sure.
We put down the education system so much inside the church that, public education's teaching kids this, or it's bad. And, it's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I think what I've been blown away by is the number of godly men and women in the schools. I'm on the athletic side, but I know it transcends athletics. It's even, on the academic side, but I'm just talking about just the athletic side. The number of godly men and women that are pouring into our kids every day, it'll blow you away. to know the numbers, because we're not exposed to that in our Christian circles. We're exposed to what's wrong with the schools and why we need to elect this person or that person because the schools are messed up. But I'm here to tell you, the podcast is a living example that there are godly men and women that are loving our kids, leading our kids, and
to me,
it's unbelievable.
It's absolutely correct. And no, I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate all the things and perspectives and stories. It's been a pleasure. It's been hugely beneficial to the audience. I know. So what I'll say is, in closing, thank you, and audience, just understand, like, it's time to take back control of our aim, our attitude, our intent, our motivation, because ultimately that's what we control. That's what we can have an impact on immediately that can impact others and impact our day. So I encourage you, take control of your aim and watch what God does. Till next time.
Amen.
God bless. Thanks.